What is the most over-asked, yet probably most ridiculous question in photography? Join me and find out. Roll titles. Hi there, Brian James, that Micro Four Thirds guy with you once again. And it's an interesting question, isn't it? What is the most superfluous question which is asked in photography, but it's also probably the most commonly asked? It's very simple. When somebody sees a photograph, invariably they say, what did you take that on? What camera did you use? What format was it? Now, I know we all ask that, but it is a bit of a stupid question when you think about it. A bit of a redundant question. There's no need for it. Now, why I'm asking this is, years ago, when I first started in this industry, when I first started in photography, rather than just using a box camera, I actually got my first proper camera. I remember having discussions with my peers at the time, and we were interested in the image. We were interested in what other people had shot, how they'd achieved that image, how they'd used the light, how they'd actually used the rules of photography to compose that image. Yes, we would discuss a little bit about gear because, well, if you've got your new camera, you always want to show it off a little bit. But after a very short space of time, we stopped talking about the cameras and we started talking about the techniques. We started looking at the images. Now, I don't see that happening these days. From what I see, we seem to be much more intent on the gear. And you know, this is a modern problem, but it's a pertinent one. And does the gear really matter? When was the last time you went into a nice restaurant and had a nice meal and saw the chef and said, what sort of knives did you use? What sort of pans did you use? It just doesn't happen. Those guys are still artists of their craft, but we don't ask them what gear they've used for it, or why they preferred one set of pans over another set of pans. We talk about what they've composed, the composition, the meal that they've created, the final part of the art itself. So why do we do this with photography? Well, there's an awful lot of things go into this when you start thinking about it, but we live in a world of consumerism and hype, and a lot of it is to do with hype. We're bombarded, absolutely bombarded by advertisements. And I'll be honest, I'm just as guilty as anybody else. I run this channel, I do reviews on this channel of equipment, sometimes because I want to actually share my thoughts on it, but a lot of the time because I know that that's what's actually going to be requested and sold, if you like. This is what actually keeps my channel going. Without doing hardware reviews, I wouldn't have a channel. I certainly wouldn't have as many viewers as subscribers. This is the world we live in. And certainly, I wouldn't, as a monetized channel, I wouldn't be getting the money in, because if you don't talk about products which advertisers want to advertise, they'll not put the adverts at the beginning or the end. You won't get any of the revenue because they simply won't advertise if you're just going to be chatting like this. This will be a low revenue video, this. So what? But the fact is that to actually appease the YouTube monster that we have to keep on doing what sells. And as far as videos, it does tend to be talking about gear. So I do that. I have to do that, and that's part of it. But it's not the be all and end all of photography, and sometimes I think we get caught up in that. When I started, I was a bit of an inquisitive sponge for knowledge. I wanted to see how other people's photographs were made. I wasn't interested too much in what made the camera they had, but I was interested in how they'd used the light, how they had, for instance, on portraits, why that portrait stood out compared to the other one, and you find that there was using a rim light, a hair light or something, just to give some separation. Why this one, the face seemed to be better, because they're using shallow depth of field and getting a separation, or how you use compression, or how you use the rule of thirds, and why all these things came together into producing a really pleasing photograph for one person and a poorer photograph of the same thing for someone else. And we'll learn these techniques. Now, some of the thing could be the fact that people are fascinated by gear these days because, well, it's so expensive, isn't it? And you want to make the right choice, so the reviews are there to help you make the right choice. But it's actually, well, it's not as expensive as it was when I was younger. When I bought my first Olympus OM1N in 1980, it cost me £129 UK. That was 75% of my month's wages. If I buy myself an Olympus OM1 today, one of the new digital ones, that is probably about 75% of an average month's wages anyway, still. But the fact is, the camera is so much better. It's got so much more. It's just in a different league to what you could have taken on my old Olympus. But the price isn't actually that much different. And the fact is, there are an awful lot more cameras lower in the range to be able to get fascinating results out of than we ever had when I was younger. Olympus, you had the OM1 and that was it. You had the Pen F perhaps. But that was half-size frame anyway, you know, it was half the size frame of this. And it was very much a compact camera. You didn't have equivalent of, say, the EM5 or the EM10, which are proper cameras in their own right, but smaller. And, you know, the thing is that in those days, there was a big separation between amateur gear and professional. You know, an amateur would buy a camera, but invariably, to get that image out, they would send them off, take them either to the drugstore or chemist, or send them off to a mail order place to get their film developed and printed. But they pretty much came out the camera, good or bad. There wasn't a huge amount of ability to change that. If you wanted to do that change, you had to invest heavily, considerably heavily, both monetarily and skill-wise, to get yourself a darkroom set up at home, to be able to get yourself an enlarger, to be able to go through the development and printing stage. It was a big skill, a big learning stage, and also extremely expensive and extremely time-consuming. Now, 95% of that's done inside the camera. And what's done outside is done on your computer with your normal home printer, which doesn't just do your photography, it does all sorts of things as well. So cost-wise, it's negligible. So the cost of a camera to do anything professional when I started in 1980 was phenomenal. It's nowhere near as expensive these days. So the expense can't be the reason that we are so fascinated. So what is it that does that? Well, as I say, a lot of it's hype and consumerism. We are living in a world of hype, and we're living in a world of built-in redundancy for products as well. A camera isn't meant to actually last more than a few years, and certainly that means that the new model has to come out to replace that faster and more frequently. And, you know, that's a big difference. I still have my Olympus OM1N from February 1980. It's 42 years old now, and I did a video on it a little while ago when I got it out of the garage and started using it again, and I'm still using it to this day. How many of the new cameras, the current OM1 for instance, how many of those will still be around in 40 years? How many will be around in 20? And if they are around in 20, are you going to be able to get batteries? Are you going to be able to get memory cards? Is it going to have the right interface to connect onto the computer of the day? It's all doubtful. Whereas I can still put a standard 35mm film into my Olympus OM1N and get prints out of it. So we are left with this hype, this fascination for gear and this fascination for the newest product. But it's interesting, there's all these arguments, and there are arguments aplenty. It's almost tribal, it really is, between formats and different camera brands and different features. It is almost tribal online when you look at some of the comments on not just my videos, but a lot of other people's videos too. It really is an interesting thing to see how people are so bought into one thing, they will actually argue almost to the point of a fight online. Why is that? I really don't know. I really can't understand why that is the case. And this is why. I've shot a couple of different brands, and I've shot a few different formats, quite a few different formats and quite a few different brands over the years. And I've got tens of thousands of photos sitting at home. And I can assure you that I could probably get a selection of all sorts of those photos out, any of them from over the years, and put them down for a professional or an amateur or even a non-photographer to see. And I would guarantee you, except for the odd lucky fluke, that not only could they not tell me what brand of camera they are on, or the actual model of camera, but they probably couldn't even tell me what format the camera that the shots were shot on. If you don't have that information, you'll rely on purely on the image. And if the image is a good image, then it's a good image. And it's interesting as well that you'll get people who say, yes, but I need a particular sort of brand or a particular sort of format to do this. But it's interesting, if you get a wildlife photographer who's a good photographer, they'll buy specialist gear. Yes, you have to go down certain gear acquisition syndrome to be able to get some of the shots. I don't dispute that. But if you've got somebody who's shooting on a long lens with, to take those shots, and they're using the normal features of the camera, they'll be able to get a good shot out of a Canon, a Nikon, a Sony, a Micro Four Thirds format camera, whatever it is, they will get it. If they've got comparative gear on each of them, their skills will take them down that route because they're taking photographs, because they will put the skill set and the eye and the image that they want into that. And that's true for almost all photographers in reality. We'll all whinge on about the different formats, but at the end of the day, we see a picture in a certain way. We see an image in a certain way. And that becomes our signature, if you like. That's our viewpoint on the world. And I know, because I've done it on various formats over various years, if I take a photograph, say on a Canon branded camera with a 50mm lens on a full frame, then I take a photograph with an APS-C, with say a 35mm lens, and then I do a 25mm on a Micro Four Thirds, all of the same scene, the photographs will almost be identical. There'll be small differences, but they'll be almost identical because what I'm seeing, the image I'm projecting onto that, is my creation. And I will put my signature style into it because that's how I see the world. And irrespective of what format of camera I use, I will adjust what I'm doing to get the pleasing image for me. And that pleasing image will almost be exactly the same on each of them because I will alter me and I'll alter how I do it to make sure it's that pleasing image of my viewpoint of the world. It's my viewpoint of the world that people see in my photographs. So where do we go from here? Are we at an impasse? Are we stuck on this gear acquisition syndrome? I don't think so. I know from my point of view, I am looking at, as I'm getting older, I'm looking more towards the image again. I did get caught in that trap of gear for a good few years, but I seem to be going back to it. Unfortunately, we don't always go there because, I have had discussions with other photographers recently where we do talk about the image. But then somebody will bring in a little bit about the gear. And then a discussion within 5 minutes will be gear-centric again rather than image-centric. But it is an important thing to remember that the image still is paramount. If you don't have a good image, why have you bought a camera? So what do you think? Do you think that we are too gear-centric? Do you think that we are caught up in the format wars? And do you think it's worth it? Do you think there is a big difference between them? Or do you think that in the end of the day, a lot of it's a perceived image difference? I tend to think a lot of it's perceived. And I'd be interested to see what your comments are. And don't forget, leave comments below, please. Really do find them interesting. I look at your comments. I read your comments, every single one if I can. And I don't comment too much back on them, but I do enjoy reading them. And to me, the comments are not there for me. They're there for the other people who read them. The other people online pick up on what you say and put your tuppence worth in. But until the next time, this is Brian James at Micro Four Thirds guy saying, keep on taking your photographs, keep on taking your images, and enjoy your photography. Bye-bye.